Looking back in time, out of all Nvidia's 20 series GPUs, the RTX 2060 is the most provoking hardware, considering on how it altered the status of mid-range level GPUs and how close it came to be suitable to build with budget-friendly gaming computers. A rather interesting tale that it took quite time and effort to put together, so we really hope you stay a while and discover whether our story's protagonist meant to disturb the peace and prosperity of the gaming universe, or will at the end have a redeeming arc. Launched on January 2019, few months later than the rest of RTX 20 series models, the Nvidia GeForce RTX 2060 was about to set some new standards. Based on a modified version of Nvidia's Turing TU106 chipset, used in RTX 2070 as well, technically, it carries over a big portion of its big brother's capabilities, but with 17% fewer shader processors, texture mapping units, ray tracing, and tensor cores, as well as 6 instead of 8 GB of GDDR6 RAM. Nonetheless, that is more than enough to offer gaming performance similar to Nvidia's GTX 1070 Ti. The RTX 2060 brought also with it the long-anticipated and very promising real-time ray tracing and deep learning supersampling technology that allegedly could transform your game's graphics into unmatched beauty and unprecedented realism with minimal performance impact. A quite impressive achievement for a mid-range GPU that was about to establish a new performance dynamic between Nvidia's high-tier Pascal models and the forthcoming mid-tier Turing GPUs. Unfortunately, with MSRP of $350 being the best-case scenario, the RTX 2060 established also a higher price point to mid-range level graphics cards, even though some will argue that, in terms of performance, the RTX 2060 isn't a mid-range card and feels more like a replacement of Nvidia's GTX 1070 Ti launched in 2017 at MSRP of $450. The reality is that both, based in Turing architecture, RTX 2060 and GTX 1660 commercially occupied the space of mid-range GPUs, replacing the previous GTX 1060 6GB edition, launched back at 2017 at MSRP of $300. That is a $50 difference to move from GTX to RTX architecture. Since then, the mid-tier GPUs are divided to low and high class, and for Nvidia in particular, they are divided to RTX and not RTX. Furthermore, the launch of Turing-based cards occurred right after a huge crypto coin crash, causing overstock of used cards in the second-hand market, with miners offloading their PC hardware to cut their losses. Nvidia's chief executive Jensen Huang admitted in an interview on MarketWatch that the secondary market could get in the way of clearing out the low to mid-range Turing gaming cards, so they decided to artificially delay their debut. Regardless Nvidia's marketing maneuver, in the eyes of most gamers, the RTX 2060 remained an overpriced product, especially when you could buy new a GTX 1660 for $250 or an RX 5500 for $200. Beyond that, there was also the used market, where people could buy a GTX 1060 and 1070 as well as the RX 570 and 580, offering 15 to 40% lower gaming performance but at 40 to 80% lower cost. The price gap was pretty big to convince gamers on a budget to pay a premium for features like tensor cores, AI machine learning capabilities, DLSS implementations, and optimized NVEC coders. Moreover, back then, the much advertised ray tracing was only supported by a dozen games, making the purchase even less appealing. As a matter of fact, Shadow of the Tomb Raider was one of those titles that you could partially enjoy Nvidia's ray tracing with the help of RTX tensor cores. Even a humble RTX 2060 has no problem to run the integrated benchmark at 1080 highest settings and ray-traced shadows set on Ultra with DLSS on quality preset. Tomb Raider is from the type of games that you can enjoy its cinematic atmosphere at 60 frames per second, thus the 80 average and 53 on 1% low is more than plentiful. On a side-by-side comparison, the 10 to 20% weaker GTX 1070 at same settings produce more or less the same frames, but without of course the DLSS and ray tracing functions. YouTube's compression hides the without doubt far more realistic shadows that the ray tracing offers compared to the flattened and sharp-edged shadows of the GTX 1070. Moreover, the RTX DLSS does an amazing job producing better image quality compared to the 1070's native resolution. However, all the above results are more or less what you would expect to see 4 years ago. Since then, a lot have changed. Ray tracing has improved. Deep learning supersampling technology has reached the 2.4 version. AMD admittedly jumped into the upscaling and sharpening race a little late. Still, by the time you will watch this video, AMD's FSR 2 and Radeon Super Resolution offer very close results to that of Nvidia's DLSS. Beyond that, the last 4 years, we witnessed historical worldwide events that had significant impact not only to our way of living, but also interfere heavily with the technological growth, the gaming industry, as well as the global economy. From PC gamers' perspective, all the above led to vast GPU shortages and high sky prices caused mainly by an unpredicted increased demand of chipsets, greedy suppliers and retailers, avaricious GPU scalpers, and manic crypto miners. Eventually, at some point, this madness reached to an end. And today, we live a déjà vu 2017 moment, where miners are selling off much of their graphics cards as they are no longer profitable due to the unprecedented increase in electricity prices and the collapse of crypto coins. Nowadays, gamers have the opportunity to score bargain deals on used graphics cards. Among these GPUs, there is also our main protagonist. The RTX 2060 is now 4 years older, but also wiser. The titles that presently implement Nvidia's ray tracing are more than enough to draw in a sufficient number of gamers interested in experiencing their favorite games with a new set of eyes. Nvidia's ray tracing and DLSS technology are now more mature, offering better quality with lower performance impact. To prove the above theories, we recruited once more the Gigabyte RTX 2060, accompanied by our low-budget gaming PC, specifications of which you can find in the description of this video, and we ran a couple of modern AAA titles. Beginning with the latest spin-off of Forza Horizon, the RTX 2060 at 1080p and high preset averaged out well above 100 frames per second, while running the game's built-in benchmark. At the same time, a less costly GTX 1070 outputs 80 and 64 average and 1% low frames per second. That is 31% less performance. At 1440p, the RTX 2060 continues to amaze, offering 91 frames per second on average and 74 frames per second on 1% low. The GTX 1070 managed to keep the frames at playable levels, despite occasionally dropping below the minimum 60 frames per second. Even though any sane owner of a mainstream GPU would not choose a resolution higher than 1080 by default, it would be interesting to watch how the RTX 2060 performs with ray tracing enabled at 1440 resolution. And guess what? The observed results were surprisingly identical to those without ray tracing. Well done, Microsoft. Joke's on me and every other gamer who expects ray tracing to apply inside the game itself, and not only in the supplementary vehicle viewing Forza Vista and Garage mode. So we had to find another game that genuinely implements ray tracing elements in actual gameplay. Hitman 3 that recently upgraded the in-game ray tracing reflections and boosted furthermore the DLSS performance, was the perfect candidate. Dubai Benchmark is our choice here since it is more GPU intensive and generally it feels a bit more representative of what you will actually experience while you are playing the campaign mode. A 1080 resolution, high settings and choosing the best simulation quality, the RTX 2060 achieved once more some amazing results. Switching to 1440p brings out all the visual details to the observer's eye. The card managed a yet impressive 81 frames per second on average and never dropped below 60 on 1% low. In comparison, the 6-year-old GTX 1070 did quite well at 1080p, being only 20% slower. However, I cannot say the same for the 1440p tests, as the performance impact was devastating, with the average and 1% low dropping at times below 60 frames and reaching the mid-40s. It would have been pointless to purchase an RTX card and shy away from testing its ray trace capabilities. Therefore, here it is, the RTX 2060 running again at 1080, but this time with ray tracing enabled at high settings. If it wasn't the YouTube compression, you could clearly see the refinement of graphics and the enhanced quality of the lighting, shadows, and reflections. Unfortunately, ray tracing is exceptionally impactful to our GPU that struggles to keep the average frames per second above 30, all the while the 1% low crawls between 20 to 10 frames per second. By enabling the DLSS on quality mode, things got better, but not enough to brag about it, especially when the overall frame rate stays below 60 and the picture quality drops also substantially. The side-by-side comparison between the RTX 2060 with ray tracing on and the GTX 1070 at 1080p neutral is a perfect example of what ray tracing brings to the table. On the right side of the screen, we can observe the pillar and how different the reflections inside the ornament knocks looks like, while switching between RTX 2060 ray tracing and GTX 1080p neutral. The same goes for the edges of every single object and how more subtle and smoother are looking with ray tracing. Now observe how more realistic the reflections on the glass of the dome and on the floor are looking. Sad to say, the performance is greatly impacted by the visual enhancements, and playing at sub-30 frames per second is painful, even for a game similar to Hitman 3 that doesn't require high frames to provide a decent gameplay experience. You will have to lower the settings to medium if you want to reach the minimum 60 frames per second. In contrast, our humble GTX 1070 is efficient enough to provide high performance at 1080p and semi-decent performance at 1440 gaming with ray tracing off. And this is where a gamer on a budget should focus on. I mean, ray tracing and visual aesthetics are great if you can afford the cost, but higher frames per second and lower frame times should always be the top priority. If we jump into the assumption that ray tracing is not a valid reason to choose a used RTX over a non-RTX card, will DLSS alone be sufficient enough to change your mind? Keep in mind that DLSS isn't anymore the only contestant on the upscaling and sharpening field, and several PC games support AMD's FSR and FSR 2.0 on every card out there today. Comparing directly these two different upscaling methods on the same Dubai scenes, you might be able to determine if RTX 2060 is a suitable choice or not. Measuring first the performance aspect of DLSS set on quality mode at 1440 resolution high settings and best simulation quality, the RTX 2060 scored an impressive 102 frames on average, while keeping the 1% low above the high 70s. The GTX 1070, at same settings but with FSR 2.0 Ultra quality enabled, it gave slightly fewer frames, keeping the 1% low above the minimum 60 frames per second. These metrics alone are meaningless if we omit to compare the offered visual quality. So here we have side by side the two contestants, with the two different upscaling techniques. Looking at the plant on the left side of the screen, it seems to be more detailed with DLSS. In contrast, FSR tries to hide the upscaling fuzziness by lowering the brightness. Now take a closer look at the floor and the shadows of people. With DLSS, the shadows are looking more subtle and fleshy, while with FSR are more apparent and flatter. DLSS does a better job with sunlight's rays and how they spread inside the room or reflect upon the floor. It is these small details that give the head start to Nvidia DLSS. But the truth is, during a gaming session using a 22-inch monitor at 1080 resolution, the small details are almost unnoticeable. And if you don't care about the unavoidable small image degeneration that both DLSS and FSR cause under the upscaling and sharpening process, then it doesn't matter which one you choose. In the light of all the previous findings, we return to the original question which motivated this very inquiry. Is Nvidia RTX 2060 suitable for low-budget gaming in 2022? To answer that, we have to consider three important factors: price, performance, and customer needs. The first two are countable, thus objective and empirical to the metrics and values we have presented in this video. Obviously, there are no bad graphics cards, only overpriced ones. Unless they are broken, of course. And since we focus on functional mainstream graphics cards, their cost should not exceed the $250. Sadly, Nvidia's plans to separate the mid-range cards into RTX and GTX didn't stop there. Since the arrival of the 3000 series, there have been no GTX models based on Amber architecture. This completely removed the affordable mid-range GTX GPUs and kept the costly RTX models. Right now, the price of new mainstream graphics cards are terrible if you consider their given performance. Nvidia is offering the low-tier RTX 3050 at a fake MSRP of $250, and only if you are lucky enough, a true retail price of $300. AMD, willingly to help the situation, priced the RX 6500 at $200 and its little brother RX 6400 at $160. Unfortunately, both are performing similar or sometimes even worse to some 6-year-old mid and low-range AMD GPUs. To make things worse, Nvidia decided to troll everybody by launching recently the terrible in price and performance GTX 1630. As a result, a used RTX 2060 might seem today quite a catch, but it would be a mistake to ignore the current status of the used GPU market. Nvidia's old, but still powerful high and mid-range Pascal GPUs are cheaper than ever. AMD's historical low MSRP of current generation cards is pulling down the cost of previous generation cards as well. This applies on every Polaris card, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility of finding an RX 5600 at a very reasonable price. So now that we know that there are graphics cards out there with a bit lower performance but better price than RTX 2060, it remains one last crucial factor that we need to unravel the mystery. And that is the customer needs. What is the main need of a customer with low budget who is looking to buy a graphics card? Generally, people prefer to play their favorite PC games at frames that match or exceed their monitor's refresh rate. Usually 60 to 75 frames per second is the most common goal for a low-budget gaming PC. Of course, it would be great to own an RTX GPU if you are a streamer to take advantage of the Turing Senvec coder that offers better representation of the original image while streaming or recording your gaming sessions, especially if you stream at lower bit rates. And if you are interested in multimedia editing and deep learning programming, then the Tensor cores of RTX 2060 with the improved AI instructions will allow you to dip your toes into the waters of machine learning applications and offer great results while at the same time rendering videos and rescaling photos. But if you don't care about content creation or machine learning, then all the above are unnecessary commodities that you will have to pay extra for them. The most effective feature for a gamer on a budget that only Nvidia's RTX series can offer is the deep learning supersampling technology. As we witnessed to our benchmarking tests, by applying the DLSS technique, we could boost the frame rates by rendering a game at a lower resolution and then using the AI to maintain the picture quality similar to the higher resolution one. But if you don't care to have the best scaling and sharpening technique out there, there are other, less effective but still quite capable methods to do that. AMD's FSR and RSR are some great alternatives that you don't need to own an RTX card to use them. These alternative scaling and sharpening techniques are capable enough to help you reach the minimum 60 frames per second when needed, admittedly with a bit worse image quality than Nvidia's DLSS. Once more, we are standing at the same crossroad as we did 4 years ago. The only difference today is that this time, a big number of gamers are able to pursue used an RTX 2060 and all the bells and whistles that brings with it. That alone almost nominates this card and its luxury functions to be suitable hardware for a low-budget gaming PC. And I must underline the word almost, because the prices of the older used graphics card are so good right now that unavoidably we see our story's protagonist losing the price to performance race at the very end of the finish line.
Oh, Moneypenny. The story of our relationship. Close, but no cigar.
Many people anticipate that Nvidia's 4000 and AMD's 7000 series will launch somewhere in the second half of this year. There is the hope that these events will bring down a bit more the average prices of used graphics cards, making the RTX 2060 more appealing to purchase. Something that I wouldn't count on, since most companies hold their own inventory until they clear their older stock or until the used GPU market dries up from possible competitive products. Contrary to popular belief, we have the opinion that the upcoming new generation GPUs will push the market prices even higher. As a result, the prices of used graphics cards will also be affected. While demand and supply are the top factors that determines the prices of the used market, it is obvious that your old GPU is worth more if it performs similar to the newish $350 mainstream GPU. The blame for this has to fall not just on Nvidia and AMD, but also to the entire supply chain, including graphics card manufacturers, suppliers, retailers, and marketplace sellers. We don't believe in bitter ends, so we added to the script something that it might leave you with a bittersweet aftertaste. In the near future, a third race of graphics cards will enter the gaming universe. It will be known as alchemists, and initially will target the budget-friendly gaming computers. This plot twist might disrupt Nvidia's and AMD's attempts to make PC gaming a forbidden hobby for low-income gamers. Eventually, time will tell how things are going to unfold, and when they do, it will be another story for another time. Until then, take care, farewell, goodbye, see you in a while.